When we talk about the stories of creation in the Bible, we usually refer to Genesis 1, creation of the whole world, and Genesis 2, which has more of a focus on humans in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. But then there's also Psalm 104 and Job chapters 38, 39, 40, 41. And these have amazing insights inside them that kind of continue this tradition. So let's explore both of them. I'm going to start with Psalm 104. And it's already interesting to find out that it's built in practically the same sequence as Genesis 1. So it starts with the creation of the world, first the light, then the firmament, then separation of land and sea, and then we get into vegetation, then there's day and night, and the sun and moon, which mark the days, mark the seasons. And then that's where they kind of diverge, talking about things in a different order. And then what they have in common, they both finish talking about food, how to provide for the world. So what's in yellow here is what's common. But that's not it. That's not all. There are differences. For example, the living things on earth come very soon in Psalm 104. But those were the last ones created on the sixth day in Genesis 1. And notice that humans are what comes in crowns creation in Genesis 1. And it also says that humans should have dominion over the other creatures. This is not the approach that we find in Psalm 104. Humans, the reference to humans is not of them having dominion, but actually working. Working so they can get their bread and their sustenance. And that's how we talk about humans in there. And we talk about them sooner. Actually, the last living things to be described are the sea creatures in Psalm 104. Are they the ones crowning in creation? No. There's this sense of community in creation. It's a community of living things. We don't feel that same type of hierarchy. Another difference is that there's mention of the animals of the air, so birds, much sooner, and they're related to the animals from the earth, which was not the case in Genesis 1, where the air animals are more associated with the sea animals. Another big difference is that Psalm 104 talks about, there's a verse on the fact that God creates with wisdom. Very explicit in this version. And also, there are 3 sections in Psalm 104 that talk about food. So this idea that God is providing is very strong in Psalm 104. So here's a table describing the main differences between the two. Psalm 104, it's testifying to the creative act around him. So the psalmist is testifying to the creative act he's observing around him. In Genesis 1, it's much more about revealing the origins of the world. So Psalm 104 starts really with a beat of creation, of the origins, but then moves on to how God provides in every day. Genesis 1 is more about the origins. Psalm 104, the sky is described as a tent, as in Genesis 1 is more described as a rigid dome. The fact that it's described as a tent can evoke many things. The first thing that for me comes to mind is that when the Hebrews got out of Egypt, and we're walking in the desert, finally get to Sinai, get the commandments, and all of these descriptions on what to do, and they build the temple, and this moving temple through the wilderness, through the desert, is a tent. So it kind of suggests a sacredness to the earth. That's one approach of thinking of a tent. Otherwise, another approach is to think of, a tent as being the house itself, like when the Hebrews were nomads. So it's a house. So basically, everyone living under that is it's our common home. Kind of an interesting theme there. Okay, in Psalm 104, birds are classified with the earth. They breathe, and they're not like the fish that have gills and breathe underwater. In Genesis 1, we know that the birds are classified with the water on the fifth day. Okay, Psalm 104, creation is made with wisdom. That's very explicit. In Genesis 1, we get more the feeling that creation is with the word. God said, something happens. God said, something happens. In Psalm 104, there's this mention of wisdom. There's also emphasis on God's providence, because there's, at least in 3 parts of it, repetition about the idea of food, and God provides. We don't feel that in Genesis 1. There's more emphasis on God's power. He commands. In Psalm 104, it speaks of predation. There's the lion that gets his food from the prey. And also the mention of death. And with death, the mention of renewal. In Genesis 1, that is not present. The grass and all the vegetation is food, and there's no mention of death. Finally, in Psalm 104, it says, God rejoices in his works. As in Genesis 1, we talk more about the fact that after creating everything, he rests after all the acts. And he also says everything is very good. So, lots of things are common, but Psalm 104 brings us closer to a God of providence, one who provides for us every day. The creatures, these all look to you, you being God, to give them their food in due season. When you give to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. Without talking directly about evolution here, Psalm 104 is touching on the cycle of life, that the death and renewal is a natural part of living on earth.